Hello and welcome to the Analyst dated 29th August 2023 by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the important current affairs articles from both The Hindu as well as Indian Express. And the handout of this very discussion is available in the description below. Let's have a look over the table of contents. So first issue relates to mental health in India. Then second is unemployment in India. Third relates to secularism. In this, we'll be drawing a comparison between Indian and Western model of secularism. Fourth relates to Financial Stability and Development Council. And last relates to centrally sponsored schemes. So let's begin. So the first article relates to mental health issues in India, and this topic pertains to this very aspect of your GS paper 2 syllabus. Let's try and understand the context. So the context is, recently 2 students of coaching centers in Kota died as they committed suicide. This took the total number of such deaths to 23 this year. Now in this regard, the first thing that we need to understand is what is mental health, because previously also National Crime Records Bureau has pointed out that when it comes to the suicides which are committed in the Indian society, it has increased by 6.2% in 2021 as compared to what we were witnessing in 2020. Now in this regard, we need to understand what is mental health. According to World Health Organization, mental health does not only refers to absence of mental illness, rather it refers to a state of mental well-being, which basically enables an individual to cope up with the stresses of life, to build effective relationships, to contribute in the society, to realize his or her ability, etc. Now in this regard, we need to understand that why there is this poor state of mental health in India. First reason is lack of awareness and sensitivity. When it comes to Indian society, we give more emphasis on physical well-being but not on mental well-being. And in Indian society, you will be astonished to know that when it comes to Indian society, we do not consider mental illness as a health issue at all. This is the reason that some sort of stigma is attached to mental illness. This you can very well understand by looking at this very diagram, wherein a study was carried out to understand what is the attitude of people towards mental illness. On account of the stigma, what happens is, if a person A is suffering from some sort of mental health issue, then he or she would be fearful to seek mental health care. Why? Because he or she is fearful that the society might label him as weak, as lunatics, etc. Then another reason is there is lack of mental health care professionals in India. This was something which was highlighted by World Health Organization, that when it comes to India, for every 1 lakh people, we only have 0.3% of the psychiatrists, 0.12% of nurses, 0.07 psychologists. Then we have very low budgetary allocation when it comes to mental health. It is only 0.6% of GDP. Whereas when you look at the developed countries, they contribute around 5% to 18% of their GDP towards mental health care. Now, on account of low budgetary allocation, what happens is the accessibility to mental health care becomes an issue, because the mental health care is not affordable. This we can very well understand by looking at this point, that is access to mental health care facility. It has been figured out that in India, only 20 to 30% of the individuals who are suffering from some sort of mental health issues are able to receive or are able to access the mental health care facilities, because we know that these mental health care facilities are quite costly. So, since there is low budgetary allocation, we witness issues in access to mental health care, because mental health care facilities are not affordable. Then, on account of changes in societies, we are witnessing poor mental health care. Why? First reason is nuclearization of families. Previously, we were having joint families. So, why on account of nuclearization of families, mental health care issues are emerging? This is because previously in joint family, you had avenue to, came across, to release your anxiety and stress, etc. But in nuclear families, what we are witnessing is we do not find such avenues to release our stress, to release our anxiety, and we are also not finding that sort of emotional support that we used to witness when the joint family system was there in India, which is still prevalent, but what we are witnessing is nuclearization of families. Another change that we have witnessed in Indian society is our society is becoming more and more materialistic. On account of this, what is happening is we are entering into some sort of social comparison, that this individual owns more materialistic wealth as compared to me. So this leads to low self-esteem, and this also leads to mental issues. Then what we are witnessing is increased use of social media. Although we have a lot of friends when it comes to social media, but we do not have face-to-face relationships. So we lack that emotional support in our real lives. These all changes in the society are also aggravating the mental issues in India. Then on account of urbanization also, what we are witnessing is the mental well-being is getting impacted. For example, according to National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, it conducted a study and it found out that the mental well-being is not in a good shape when it comes to the urban areas. Why is it so? There is more stress, there is lack of physical well-being as well, and here increased use of social media is also there. More materialistic society is there, that is also one of the reasons. And we have also found out that the mental healthcare issues are more prominent in the southern states of India. Why? Because these southern states are more developed and more urbanized. Now, let's look into the steps that the government of India has taken with regard to mental health care in India. Firstly, we have Mental Health Care Act of 2017, which recognizes right to access to mental health care facilities. And it also decriminalized suicide. Previously, if a person A committed suicide and he did not die, then this person A was punished. But this Mental Health Care Act decriminalized suicide. It recognized that if a person A is committing suicide, then this person is under severe stress. Then we have Right of Persons with Disability Act 2017, which basically recognizes mental illness as one of the disabilities. And accordingly, such individuals who are suffering from mental illness are provided with certain rights and entitlements, which basically enable their empowerment and their inclusion in the Indian society. Then we have National Mental Health Program 1982. This was basically rolled out in accordance with the WHO recommendation. What we exactly did under this program? We basically made sure that mental health is made a part of the general healthcare system. So what we did is we established district mental health program. Under this, at district level, the people who are suffering with mental illness would be provided with, counseling facilities, emotional care support. And under this program, we also raised awareness with regard to mental health issues. Okay, in the schools, in the communities, through plays, through radios, through newspapers, etc. Then the government of India has also started certain tele-mental health support. For example, Kiran, which is a 24/7 toll-free helpline. So a person who is suffering from stress, anxiety, or who is witnessing suicidal tendency can visit this particular website to seek emotional support. Okay. Then there is this Manodarpan helpline also. This is specially for the students. So it basically intends to ensure that the students have better mental health. Now, let's look into what more needs to be done in order to make sure that the Indian society do not witness this poor state of mental well-being. First is, we need to address the stigma which is attached with mental illness and, mental health. In this regard, we can take help from ASHAs to raise awareness with regard to mental health care issues. Because if the stigma is attached, then the person who is suffering from some sort of mental illness would be, coming to access the mental health care facilities. As we discussed previously, on account of this stigma, if a person is suffering from mental, issues, then also he would not be coming to access the mental health care facilities, because he is fearful that the society would be labeling him as weak. Then the government needs to put in place requisite mental healthcare infrastructure, and in this regard, the government needs to make requisite budgetary allocation in alignment with what is being done in the developed nations, in order to address the gap in treatment, in order to basically make the mental health care facilities more accessible and more affordable. Then in this regard, WHO has pointed out 3 parts. First is deepen value and commitment. In this, the WHO has pointed out that we need to promote social inclusion of people who are suffering from mental health issues. And we need to give both mental and physical health equal priority. Because right now I told you, when it comes to Indian society, we give more priority to physical well-being but not to mental well-being. So this thing needs to be changed. Then it talks about intensifying engagement across sectors, and we need to step up investment in mental health. Then it talks about reshaping the environment. So we need to reshape the environment in homes, schools, workplace. Basically, we need to create the awareness with regard to mental health issues. And we need to make this thing quite normal that, okay, if a person is, witnessing some sort of mental health issue, then it's absolutely normal. Please go and seek, medical advice in this regard. We should not label that person as weak or lunatics. Then we need to strengthen mental health care facilities. We need to boost community-based networks of services instead of, doing custodial care in psychiatric hospitals. And we need to make mental health affordable and accessible for all. This is all that we need to know with regard to this article. Let's move to the next one. Now, this next article relates to unemployment in India, and this topic pertains to this very aspect of our GS Paper 3 syllabus. Let's try and understand the context. So, the context is, recently 51,000 Amrit Rakshaks got job letters at Rozgar Mela. Now, in this regard, we need to understand what is the unemployment situation in India, why there is need of these Rozgar Melas. First thing that we need to understand is, what is unemployment all about? Now, if an individual A is seeking job, but then also he or she is not able to get a job, then this state would be referred as unemployment. But if there is an individual B who is not seeking for any sort of job, but he is not working anywhere, then this individual would not be considered as unemployed. So unemployment is a state wherein an individual is seeking for a job, but he or she is not able to find one. Now, let's look at the unemployment situation in India. So this is the graph which highlights that how during COVID-19 pandemic, unemployment increased in India, but even today, it is quite high. Now, in this regard, we need to understand what are the causes of unemployment in India. First is jobless growth. What is jobless growth? Wherein the economy is growing, but that economic growth is not leading to more employment generation. When it comes to India, it is growing at a rate of 7 to 8%, but when it comes to employment generation, it is quite low. This we can very well understand by this concept called employment elasticity. What is employment elasticity? It basically refers to percentage growth in employment as a result of 1% increase in GDP. So if you look at the figure related to employment elasticity, what we are witnessing is, it was around 1 in 1970s, 0.4 in 1990s, and currently it is 0.1. Why we are witnessing jobless growth? Because on account of increased automation, the business houses or the companies have stopped demanding more manpower. Then we have not been able to boost our manufacturing sector or the MSME sector, which have great, employment generation capacities. On account of this, we are witnessing jobless growth in India. Then when it comes to agriculture, we witness seasonal unemployment here. What is seasonal unemployment? Wherein a particular, sector produces products or services for certain period only in a year, and then for the rest of the year the workers who are engaged in that sector remain unemployed. That is the case with agriculture. Now in case of agriculture, what happens is the demand for workers increases during the harvesting season, but when it comes to the rest of the period of a particular year, these workers remain unemployed. And we know that agriculture basically employs around 50% of our Indian population. So this is a huge problem. Then there is lack of industry-academia linkage. Now in this regard, Center for Sustainable Employment at Azim Premji University found out that unemployment among the well-educated is thrice the national average. Why is it so? Because there is lack of industry-academia linkage. What do I mean by this? This implies that when it comes to the education which is being imparted in the colleges, okay, in the institutes, it is mostly theory oriented, and we are not providing vocational training or vocational skills to the students. And we know that automation is increasing, so the companies are now demanding new set of skills, like the individual should know how to use artificial intelligence, how to use big data analytics, etc., machine learning. So these sort of vocational skills are not being provided in our colleges. That is the reason that unemployment is high in India. Then on account of joint family system, what we witness is disguised unemployment, especially in the rural areas. Why? Because in rural areas, all the family members are engaged in agriculture. Now let's understand what is disguised unemployment with a very basic example. Let's suppose 5 individuals are required to produce 100 units of a particular product. But what we are doing is 8 people are doing that same work and the output is again 100. Okay, the output is not increasing. So these 3 individuals are basically, they are not contributing to the output production. So the marginal productivity is 0. This is known as disguised unemployment. So even if I am increasing the labor unit, there is no change in the output. So it would be appearing to you apparently that all the people are employed, but since it is not making any impact on the output, this is referred as disguised unemployment, which is quite high in the rural areas since whole family is engaged in agriculture. Then there is low growth of manufacturing. It is still contributing around 60% of the GDP, and we plan to increase the contribution of manufacturing sector to 25% of GDP by 2022 under National Manufacturing Policy. But we have yet not been able to do this. Why? There are certain set of issues that this manufacturing sector is witnessing. It is not getting requisite skilled manpower. As we discussed, there's lack of industry-academia linkage. There are infrastructure bottlenecks. Land acquisition could not be done at a very fast pace. Then in manufacturing sector, we are witnessing a very unique phenomena, that is missing middle. What is this missing middle? When it comes to the manufacturing sector in India, either we have tiny enterprises or big giants. We don't have mid-sized manufacturing firms. Why is it so? Because these tiny, manufacturing firms get a lot of incentives by the government. But when it comes to big giants, they are not allowed to hire and fire workers at their own will. Okay. So since there are rigid labor laws, these tiny firms do not have incentive to become, mid-sized firm. Because if they become mid-sized firm, then they would also be facing these rigid labor laws. And another reason is these tiny manufacturing units are not able to get requisite access to credit. So this is also one of the reasons that they are not able to grow into mid-sized manufacturing units. And since the manufacturing sector has great employment potential, this is one of the reasons that India has high unemployment rate. Then what all steps the government of India has taken in order to address the unemployment situation in India? First is MG Narega. Under this, the adult in a particular household get a guaranteed 100 days of unskilled work in a particular year. Then we have PM Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which basically enabled the youth to get the requisite skill set which is being demanded by the industry. Then the government of India came up with Startup India, which basically provided a lot of incentives to the startups, so that startup ecosystem could be given a boost in India, because the startup ecosystem has great employment potential. Then we have Rozgar Mela, under which the government is planning to provide around 10 lakh jobs, which would be available, for the candidates. So the candidates can apply in Group A, B, gazetted posts, Group B, non-gazetted post, and Group C, non-gazetted post. So under this, the different ministries or departments can carry out, they can carry out the recruitment, or they can carry out the recruitment through recruitment agencies like UPSC, SSC, Railway Recruitment Board, etc. Now, what more needs to be done in order to address the unemployment situation in India? We need to focus on labor-intensive manufacturing sectors like food processing sector, garments industry, footwear industry, leather industry, etc. because they have great employment potential. Then we need to invest in agriculture. We need to improve the irrigation facilities. We need to come up with, high-yielding variety of seeds. Then we need to diversify the agriculture. Diversification of agriculture means instead of growing, the normal crops that are there, like the food crops, we should rather move towards horticulture, the floriculture, animal husbandry, dairy farming, etc. Livestock rearing. Because when we go for diversification of agriculture, it has great employment potential. And these, diversification of agriculture that we are going to do, let's say with horticulture, floriculture, animal husbandry, livestock rearing, poultry farming, etc. This would give a major boost to agro-processing industry, which is a highly labor-intensive sector. Then we need to make requisite changes in the education system. We need to make sure that the graduates are getting the requisite vocational skills, which are being demanded by the industries right now. That means they need to be trained in coding, how to use big data analytics, how to use machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc., which would actually enhance their employment capacity. Then we need to make requisite reforms to give a boost to our manufacturing sector, especially when it comes to changes in the Land Acquisition Act, so that land acquisition could be done at a easier pace and at an earlier stage as well. And we need to make requisite reforms in the labor laws, so that we do not witness the phenomena called missing middle. And the government also need to put in place requisite infrastructure, so that the manufacturing sector do not witness the infrastructure bottlenecks. Then lastly, a parliamentary committee pointed out that we need to come up with urban Manrega, because after COVID-19 pandemic, we witnessed a lot of unemployment situation even in the urban areas. So this has been proposed by a parliamentary committee. This is all that we need to know with regard to this topic. Let's move to the next one. Now this next topic relates to the topic called secularism, and this pertains to this very aspect of our GS paper 1 syllabus. We also have a previous year question in this regard, so after listening to this very discussion, please try and attempt this very question. Let's try and understand the context first. So the context is, France will ban children from wearing abaya, which is a loose-fitting, full-length robes which are worn by some Muslim women in state-run schools. Why? Because wearing of abaya goes against France's strict secular laws in education. Previously also, France has banned students from wearing certain, symbols and clothes like hijab. Students were not allowed to wear crosses, etc. because these attires or these religious symbols enables an individual to understand that this particular individual A belongs to which religion, and this is not something which is allowed in France. So the students are not allowed to showcase their religious affiliations when they are in school, because in France religion is considered to be a private affair. Now in this regard, the thing that we need to understand is, what is secularism? It is basically an ideology which emphasizes on separation of state from religion. So when it comes to the Indian model of secularism, we have two aspects. First is dharma nirpekshta. How we are able to ensure dharma nirpekshta? Because In India, we have no official state religion. So the state do not identify itself with any particular religion, and it did not, do any sort of favor to any particular religion. Then we follow Sarva Dharm Sambhav. Sarva Dharm Sambhav, wherein we give equal respect and equal protection to all the religions. Now, let's try and draw a comparison between Indian model and Western model of secularism. When it comes to Indian model, we follow positive concept of secularism. So there is no mutual or strict mutual exclusion between the state and religion. As I told you, we follow the idea of Sarva Dharm Sambhav, and we follow the idea of principled distance. So we maintain principal distance from all the religion. There is no strict separation of state and religion. But when it comes to Western model of secularism, they follow negative concept of secularism, because there is strict mutual exclusion between the state and the religion. Now, what do I really mean when I say that when it comes to India, we follow positive concept of secularism, and when it comes to Western model, they follow negative concept of secularism? This you will be able to understand with this point, that is state-sponsored reforms, which is allowed in case of Indian model of secularism. Because I told you, there is no strict separation between the state and the religion. When it comes to Indian model, state-sponsored, religious reforms are allowed. For example, we have banned untouchability. Through Sabrimala judgment, the Supreme Court has allowed entry of women who are of menstruating age in the Sabrimala temple. So when it comes to Indian model, state-sponsored reforms in the religion are allowed. But that is not the case in Western model of secularism. In the Western model, even if a particular sect is facing some sort of discrimination in their particular religion, then also state cannot do anything for you. Then when it comes to Indian model of secularism, we have the concept of minority rights, which are provided under Article 29 and 30. But there is no such concept when it comes to Western model of secularism. And when it comes to Indian model of secularism, the state can support, financially the educational institutions which are run by minorities. This is something which is provided in Article 30 of the Indian Constitution. But this is something which is not allowed in the Western model of secularism. Why? Because I told you right now, there is mutual exclusion, strict separation between the state and religion. And lastly, when it comes to the Western model of secularism, the individuals are not allowed to wear religious symbol in the public domain, especially in school and offices, like what we have discussed right now with regard to France. But when it comes to Indian model of secularism, you can wear your religious symbol even in the public sphere. For example, the Sikh wears, turban, and we also, wear our religious threads, etc. But when it comes to Western model, the individuals are not allowed to, showcase their religious affiliations in the public sphere. Example, when they are in school. Because when it comes to Western model, they consider religion to be a private sphere. So you can wear your religious symbols or your religious, attire, whatever is there, when you are in the private sphere. Okay, when you are in, let's say, the church or in temple, or when you are at your home, but not in public sphere. These all are the differences between the Indian model of secularism and Western model of secularism. Now, when I talk about significance of Indian model of secularism, we need to understand that despite having religious diversity, on account of this model of Indian secularism, we have been able to ensure peace and harmony in the Indian society. And when it comes to Indian model of secularism, it has enabled us to move towards a more egalitarian society, a society which is more equal, more inclusive. Why? Because in Indian model of secularism, state-sponsored reforms in the religions are allowed. This is all that we need to know with regard to this topic. Let's move to the next one. Now, this next topic relates to Financial Stability and Development Council. And this topic pertains to this very aspect of your GS paper 2 syllabus. And we also have a previous year question in this regard. So try and attempt this very question. Now, Let's try and understand the context. So the context is the Subcommittee of Financial Stability and Development Council, which is headed by RBI Governor, has pointed out that we have resolved to remain vigilant against any build-up in vulnerabilities in the financial system as well as in the broader economy amid uncertain global environment. Now, what do I mean when I say amid uncertain global environment? We are witnessing a lot of uncertainties when it comes to global economy. Why? In the background of Russia-Ukraine war. Why? Because these two are the major suppliers of food, especially the wheat. On account of this, food inflation is being witnessed across the globe. And on account of this, what we are seeing is the USA and European Union economies are witnessing inflation tendencies. And this have repercussion for India. Why? Because these are our major trading partners. Now, in this regard, what we need to understand is what is this council all about. Now, this is the apex level forum which was constituted in 2010 by an executive order. So, since it was created by an executive order and not by an act of the parliament, it is not a statutory body, because a statutory body is one which is created by an act of the parliament. And this forum was basically created based on the advice of Raghuram Rajan Committee on Financial Sector Reforms in 2008. Now, let's look into the composition of this very body. So, it is chaired by Union Finance Minister of India, and its members include heads of financial sector regulators like RBI, Security and Exchange Board of India, Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority, Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority. It has Finance Secretary or Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs, Secretary of Department of Financial Services and Chief Economic Advisor. This apex level forum also have the power that it can invite experts in its meetings, okay, to discuss a particular issue. Then what are the functions that this council basically performs? So it monitors the macroprudential supervision of the economy. What do I mean by this? This implies that they look into the health, the soundness and the vulnerabilities which the financial system of India is witnessing to identify systematic risk. And once you identify systematic risk, the government would be in a position to take proactive measures in order to make sure that the vital financial services are in place which are necessary for economic growth. And it looks into the large financial conglomerates. It addresses inter-regulatory coordination. How come? Because as we discussed its composition, it has members who are the heads of these financial sector regulators. So it addresses the inter-regulatory coordination and the financial sector development issues. It also focuses on financial literacy and financial inclusion. This is all about this council. Let's move to the last topic. Now this last topic basically pertains to centrally sponsored scheme, and this topic relates to this very aspect of our prelim syllabus. Let's try and understand the context. So the context is Indian Council of Social Science Research received more than 3,000 project proposals to study the impact of various centrally sponsored schemes. Now what this research is going to do? It is going to look into the impacts of various centrally sponsored schemes like PM Ujjwala Yojana, under which the government intended to provide clean cooking fuel to households who are basically BPL families, below poverty line families, and who do not have a prior LPG connection. So this research One of the example is this. These research would be looking into this aspect, that what is the impact of this PM Ujjwala Yojana when it comes to the adverse health effects which were witnessed especially among the women on account of using unclean cooking fuel. Because previously WHO has pointed out that there are premature deaths on account of use of unclean cooking fuel. So such research would be looking into the various impacts of such centrally sponsored scheme. Now in this regard, what we need to understand is, what are centrally sponsored scheme? This we'll be able to understand in a better manner by drawing a comparison between centrally sponsored scheme and central sector scheme. When it comes to the funding of centrally sponsored scheme, it is being funded by both the union as well as state governments. And this funding is done in a predetermined ratio. So the funding could be done in the ratio of 60-40, whereas 60% of the fund is provided by center government and 40% is provided by the state government. Or it could be in a ratio of 90-10, wherein 90% of the fund would be provided by the union government and 10% by the state. This ratio of funding, especially in case of northeastern states or special category states. What are special category states? So these are the states which are facing developmental challenges. They have economic and infrastructural backwardness, they have hilly terrain, they have majority of tribal population, they are very close to border areas, etc. Example are Assam, Nagaland, Himachal Pradesh, etc. So when it comes to centrally sponsored scheme, the funding is done by both the center and the state. But when it comes to central sector scheme, it is wholly funded by the central government. Okay. When it comes to the subjects, so in centrally sponsored scheme, they are usually on the subjects which are there in the state list. But when it comes to the central sector scheme, they are usually on the subjects which are there in the union list. When it comes to the implementation agency, in case of centrally sponsored scheme, the implementation is being done by the respective state governments. But when it comes to central sector scheme, it is implemented by central government itself. Okay, by its various ministries and departments. What are the examples of centrally sponsored scheme? Example are MG Narega and National Social Assistance Program. When it comes to central sector scheme, what are the example? Mudra Yojana and BharatNet project. So this is all that we need to know with regard to today's newspaper. Thank you for listening to this very discussion and all the very best for your preparation.